Good morning, welcome into Good Morning KU. I'm Nicole Fye, and today we have a very special guest, Bob Schieffer. Bob, the first thing that I really would like to ask you is more so we're going to keep it on the fun side. So tell me about your experience in your college days at TCU.
Well, they were not great. I tell you, the first 2 years I was at TCU, I was a student, and then in the summer of my sophomore year, I got a job working at a small radio station in the news department of the radio station, and I then worked full time from there on in until graduation, and it was the oddest arrangement I've ever heard of. I worked from 1 to 4, and then I was off from 4 to 8, and then I came back and worked 8 to midnight. And what we did in those days, we had these panel trucks with police radios in them, and we would listen to the police radios, and if there was what we call the 3 R's, wrecks, rapes, or robberies, we got in those panel trucks and went to the scene and did an on-the-scene broadcast. And this was thought to be very technologically advanced, you know. So the result was, in those 2 years, I probably attended more car wrecks than any single human being on Earth. But that's where I really got most of my reporting experience while I was still in college. But as a result, I didn't have much of a college life. After that, I just went to class, did what I needed to do to graduate because I knew I wanted to be a reporter, and I just wanted to get the things you needed to do done. And so I really probably didn't get the experience that I should have had in college. But I'll tell you one thing, Nicole. You know, you want to be on the alert for this. They had the most unusual pay arrangement at this place that I've ever heard of before or since. I made the grand sum of $1 an hour, okay? But for the first hour of overtime, you got 90 cents. The second hour of overtime, you got 80 cents. The third hour of overtime, 70 cents. So we used to say if we worked 11 hours, we had to pay them a dime, you know.
That's exactly. I feel like that should go up. That rate should be going up instead of going down.
But it went down. I don't know how they got away with it. I've never heard of another arrangement like that. But I've always been alert and always asked whenever I got a job after that, now how does the overtime part work?
It scarred you. Man, so what was one of the coolest things, maybe not cool, that probably isn't the word to use with car wrecks, but a memorable experience that you went out and covered while you were working with that radio station?
Well, I remember once, probably I'd been there about 2 weeks, and I remember going on the air and saying, in this reporter's experience, this is the worst car wreck I have ever seen. Now, mind you, I'd been a reporter for 2 weeks. I didn't explain that part. But it was, you really learned a lot. And you learned a lot of things not to do. Once I was standing next to a shallow grave out at Lake Worth where there had been a body. The police had found someone had been killed in a kind of a gangland slaying. And I managed to back up and stepped off and fell into the grave.
Oh, no.
And I tell you, it was one of the worst experiences of my life. And the cops never let me forget it. I lived with that for a long, long time. I also had to take my clothes off and throw them away. I mean, there was such an odor about them, you couldn't wash it out. Because the body had been there about 3 weeks, but fell in right on top of it.
Oh, man.
Not too cool.
Not too cool, not at all. So those first 2 years that you were in college, would you say you had the normal college experience?
Up until that time, and I did. And I mean, I majored in journalism. I was the sports editor of the school newspaper in those days, and I'll give you just a little warning. 10 years from now, don't go back and look at what you wrote when you were in college. I believe it was some of the worst stuff I've ever read in my life.
I've actually been
I said,
doing
no,
that.
That wasn't me. That was somebody else that was using my name. I didn't write that.
I've actually been doing that and trying to build a portfolio and everything. I go back and look at some of the sports stories that I've written, and I think to myself, how did I become this from this. And there's just no transition that I can see. What I think one of the things that I was really excited to ask you about was, were there any kind of slang terms that you used when you were back in college? I mean, we have some now that I don't even think that I understand.
Yeah.
But were there any kind of slang terms that you used?
You know, I'm trying to think. I wonder if cool. I'm not sure people said cool by then, but they probably did. Because the term cool kind of came along with rock and roll, and that was the beginning of, you know, I was in college in the late '50s, so we were coming out of rhythm and blues into rock and roll, and I think cool was the word that we used. But that's the only one I can think of. Yeah.
Now
most of the time we just cursed.
Right. I like that. It's straight and to the point. So now I still use cool, but that's because I consider myself a little old school type flavor going on. But if I were to say to you, it's lit, what would you think that means?
It's lit?
Yes.
I would think it's hot, maybe.
Yes, exactly.
What if I said to you, don't try to shade me?
Don't try to shade you?
Shade me. You know what that means?
No.
This is one that I just learned. It's trash talk. And it's very big in the African American community.
Oh, yeah.
You shade somebody. That's you trash talk.
Oh,
them.
you throwing shade?
Throw shade.
Throw shade. That's
That's
it.
it.
That's the one. Throwing
That
shade.
was one I learned, and this is a new one for me.
Cool. See, I still use it. I still use it. Another
That's
thing
hot.
that I was really thinking about, and I did a lot of research on this last night, ramen noodles were invented in 1952. There's this whole stigma about college students eating ramen noodles and Cheez-Its and simple things. Is that something that you partook in?
But that was, I don't believe so. I don't believe so. I think we just ate health foods, hamburgers, hot dogs.
Only the nutritious stuff.
Yeah.
That's good. That actually probably has more nutritional benefits than ramen noodles or any kind of thing. So the next thing that I was really excited to ask you about was, are there any stories from your college years that you will never forget, you always remember, but kind of, you know, maybe haunt you in the best way, where you look back and you just, you laugh at how silly you were, but you learn from it?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you one of my reporting experiences in those days. I am the only person that I ever heard of who got carded at a murder. And this was, once we had this, there was this nightclub out on the east side of Fort Worth. And so I went out there, and I got there, and I very proudly walked up, and the guy said, I'll have to see some ID. So I pulled out my press card. And he said, no, I have to see your driver's license. They sell alcohol here. And I was not yet 21 years old. I was 20 years old. In those days, you had to be 21 to buy alcohol. And so I couldn't go in and cover this story because they sold alcohol at this place. Obviously, they weren't selling any while they were cleaning out this bombing that had taken place. But I never heard of another reporter that got carded at a murder. So I always got.
They couldn't have just put the X's on your hands?
Yeah, with a little.
Or given, you know, a bracelet, maybe
bracelet,
a dunce cap or something.
They didn't think of that.
That is definitely a special experience. I get carded all the time, too. It stinks because I look a lot younger than I am. How old would you say I am?
I'm going to say you're 23.
Oh, you heard me say that earlier, didn't you?
See, I'm a reporter. I listen. No, I can imagine that, but I'll tell you, sometimes that's not always a bad thing. I remember once my wife got carded. We went to the movies, and we were buying senior citizen tickets, and they said, I'll have to see some ID. They carded her because they didn't think she was that old. It made her day.
That's a compliment, yes.
Yeah.
See, that's what I'm hoping carries over to when I'm at an older age and then people ask to see my ID for something like
It'll
that.
be fine.
There you
You
go.
want them to keep asking for a long time, and you'll be in good shape.
So are there any other experiences maybe that, have you heard or any college stories from today that you think of or that makes you think of your college days?
Well, it was so different. For example, the boys couldn't go in the girls' dorms. You could, you know, they had a lady that sat down, and you could go in and ask to see someone, and they would come down to the lobby. There were obviously no coeducational dorms. In my day at TCU, women only could wear skirts, no pants, obviously no shorts. And the guys, they were pretty much slobs. I mean, they wore Levi's mostly, you know, and a lot of people T-shirts and stuff like that. But the women were, it was a whole different deal with the dress codes and all of that.
So I wouldn't have been allowed on campus wearing pants.
Absolutely not. It's hard to think, isn't it?
It really is, actually,
Yeah.
because I can't imagine wearing a skirt all day, every day. But then again, I'm kind of a tomboy at the same time. So another question that we're going to turn serious just for a little bit, I
All right.
promise. We'll come right back.
Okay.
I was kind of wondering that over your journalism career, how the role that women have played in journalism has changed.
Well, it has really changed. And as it is in medical school, there are now more women in journalism schools, as it is in law school, where there are more women now in law schools. I mean, we're reaching a point in this country where the majority of lawyers and doctors and professional people will be women, because women, I gotta say, are just, they're just running ahead of the guys these days. And at CBS, all of the jobs, the most dangerous jobs we have now and the most important jobs we have for reporters are generally women. I mean, Clarissa Ward, who was the first reporter to get into Syria, and she went in by herself. She's now at CNN. Holly Williams is there in the Middle East now. She takes the most dangerous assignments. Lara Logan, who's just almost a legend for 60 Minutes. These are women, and think of it, in my day, they wouldn't even let women work on the city desk at the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, where I later worked after college. The women worked in the society department, and I think we maybe had one woman that worked on the city side as a reporter. Nancy Cordes for CBS, she's now our chief congressional correspondent. Margaret Brennan is our White House correspondent. All of these jobs that used to be, you know, strictly for men only, are now women are doing them, and I got to say they're doing them better than the men. And I mean, it's a meritocracy. If they weren't good, somebody else would replace them. So, and women are also catching up in the managerial ranks. We now have. I can remember a point when in Washington where the bureau chief was a woman, the deputy was a woman, the senior producer for the evening news was a woman. Our bureau chief now is a guy, but I mean that's pretty much the way it is all over the industry, and the pay's going up, and they're getting equal pay. So I think there's a long runway and a wide runway for women in journalism now. And frankly, I wonder sometimes, where did the guys go? And I think they just got beat out for these jobs a lot of times. I think
They're
the women
accepting
were
the
just,
L on that one. That's another
Yeah.
slang term, the L or the dub.
That's a new one. I don't know that one.
Okay, well, see, you're learning stuff.
That's why I'm
See,
here.
And I don't consider myself the most fluent in slang terms, but I do know that one because it pertains to sports.
There you go.
And that's my favorite. So we were talking about women in journalism and moving up in the ranks. And I know that you lived through the civil rights movement and the women's rights movements for the most part. But looking back at the standpoint that you were in when you were in college or young adulthood, did you see this change happening?
Sure. I mean, think about this. I never attended any school that any African American person had attended. When I went to TCU, no black athlete had played in the Southwest Conference, which was one of the big football sports conferences. All of that changed. When I worked at the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, the style of the newspaper was, in first reference, you said Bob Schieffer. If it was a woman, in the second reference, you said Mrs. Schieffer. except if it was an African American woman. And in those cases, you referred to them as the Schieffer woman. You didn't give any titles. I mean, and that was in my lifetime. I mean, in my professional lifetime, when I was a grown person. I grew up in the Gmku South. Fort Worth was far away. We didn't have any trouble or anything in Fort Worth. We peacefully integrated the schools. It took a while to get it done, but we did. But things were so segregated that I never shook hands with a black person until I was in the United States Air Force, a second lieutenant in the Air Force. And I remember it very well. I was in the passenger terminal at Travis Air Force Base. It wasn't that I didn't want to, or did I make an effort not to. Our just paths never crossed. They lived on one side of town and we lived on the other. And I mean, think how far we have come since then.
Miles.
I mean, we still have a long, long way to go. There's no question, but we've also come a very long way.
Yes, very true. And I think that is something that we can reach here in the near future, especially too. And you mentioned you were in the Air Force.
Mm-hmm.
What was your role in the Air Force?
I flew the LSD, the large steel desk, for 3 years. And the reason that I did, I guess the reason is I was in Air Force ROTC in college. In those days, there was a draft. I didn't get in ROTC for noble reasons. I got in it because I didn't want to get drafted. And so anyway, I was in ROTC, and I was going to a pilot training school. But I played, I mean, that was my aim. But I played baseball at TCU, and what is memorable about my baseball career is how it ended. Dizzy Dean's nephew, whose name was Paul Dean Jr., hit me. He played for SMU, and he hit me in this eye with a baseball. And that ended my baseball career. But it also, after that, I couldn't pass the physical to go to pilot training, and so that's why. But I always had journalism jobs, even in the 3 years in the Air Force. I was the editor of the base newspaper at Travis Air Force Base, and other jobs like that.
TCU, SMU, was that when that rivalry started? Because I heard that there was just
such
a terrible rivalry. I was in Dallas covering the women's Final Four, and one of the girls played for SMU and transferred from TCU to there, and so many people were just giving her a hard time about it.
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of that is just because SMU's in Dallas and TCU's in Fort Worth, and it's a great rivalry between the two cities that carries over into the colleges. I mean, the two cities have never cooperated on anything except building the Dallas-Fort Worth airport. And, you know, those of us from Fort Worth, we say Fort Worth is where the West begins and Dallas is where the East peters out. That's how we look at it. And it's just always been this great rivalry between the two cities. And so the SMU-TCU rivalry grows out of that. But the great rivalry now for TCU is Baylor.
Definitely.
It used to be the great rivalry was A&M, Texas A&M against everybody else. The Aggies were for the Aggies, but nobody else ever was. But now Baylor has passed even that. It's like I always say it's like the Shia and the Sunni when you have the Texas Christians against the Baylor Baptists.
I've never actually looked at it from that
No, not many people have.
You have to be a little more involved than me from Kansas, probably.
Right. Yeah.
We talked about earlier how you got started at CBS, and you walked in to somebody else's interview.
Yes.
And got the job.
It was, we had come to Washington. I'd been hired by this company called Metro Media, which was going to form the fourth television network. And I'd come from Texas, where I'd been a newspaper reporter and just briefly a TV reporter. And got to Washington and discovered that it was not, well, for one thing, the financing for Metro Media forming the fourth television network fell through, and so it didn't happen. And so I wound up at their local station there, and it was just not a good thing. And I realized, I said to my wife, I said, you know, we've really made a mistake. We really need to go back to Texas. And she said, well, if you haven't noticed, I'm pregnant. And I said, well, yeah, I have noticed. She said, you think we could at least wait until this baby comes, and then we can, because I had left her. I mean, you know, I left her to sell the house and do all move and everything, and I went to Washington. And so I said, yeah. So anyway, while we were waiting for the baby to come, I'd always wanted to work at CBS, and I'd never been able to get an appointment. So one day I just took a deep breath and went over there without an appointment. No security in those days at any business. And I went up to the second floor, and first person I saw, I said, I'm Bob Schieffer, and I'm here to get to see Mr. Small about a job. He was the bureau chief. And this woman said, oh yes, Bob, come right in. I was ushered into the bureau chief's office and was subsequently hired. And I found out later I'd walked in on another person's appointment. Bob Hager was a local reporter in Washington. And they had thought I was him. I mean, by the time the interview was over, they knew I wasn't him. But some years later, when I was writing a book, I called him and asked him, I said, did you have an appointment in 1969 to see Bill Small about a job? And he said, yeah. He said, but you know, nothing ever came of it, and said NBC offered me a job, and so I went to work there. And he did. He worked there about 35 years, I think, Bob Hager. He didn't think it was as funny as I did, but that's absolutely true.
So if I took a page out of your book and walked in on someone else's interview, I wouldn't be escorted out by security?
I don't know.
Could I play the Bob Schieffer card is basically what I'm asking.
It'd be just how much you, what you thought you could get away with. You know?
Oh, I might have to try that actually. We're getting to that point where.
Well, it's worth a try. But I tell you what you always have to remember is there are jobs there, but you just have to find them. They're not going to come find you most of the time. And that's my advice to young people. And what I say is the harder you try, the better the chances you'll get lucky, like I did. Because, you know, all of us, somehow lightning has to strike somewhere along the way, you know. But it won't strike if you're home moping.
Very true.
You have to be out there and pushing your case. And, you know, the thing about journalism, nobody is ever going to get mad at you for being too aggressive. That's what we do. That doesn't mean that you want to be abrasive or rude or anything. But you just always have to keep pushing the envelope a little bit, and eventually it'll pay off.
Hopefully, yes, eventually.
It will. You'll get a job.
That's wonderful.
Don't you worry about
it. I'm really taking this to heart if you haven't noticed.
I think you will.
Need to be writing some notes down.
I think you've got what it takes.
Well, so you got the job at CBS, had an illustrious career. You covered the Pentagon, White House, pretty much every political corner that you could have. Mm-hmm. What are you going to do now that you're retired?
Well, you know, I'm just doing a little here and there. And like I did 3 weeks ago, I did an interview with Willie Nelson, which is one of the most fun things I've ever done in my life. And that's what I'm going to kind of concentrate on, is doing things that I just really enjoy doing, because I don't have to do the other stuff anymore. I can kind of do whatever I want to. And the reason, when you come right down to it, the reason we all get into journalism is because it's fun. And that's what you should do. And that's my advice to young people, is pick out something you really like to do. And don't worry about the success or the pay or the hours. If you're good at it, all that takes care of itself. And you know, if you get into something and you say, well, wait a minute, this is not what I thought it was, do something else. One great thing about being young is you have plenty of chance to try something different. I mean, when you're my age, you know, you have to be careful about the choices you make. You know, the sun in my sky is over here. The sun in your sky is way over here. And you have plenty of time to change course and change direction if things don't work out. And that's my advice. But what you never want to do is get to be my age and say, you know, I wish I'd have tried this or that. I could have done it. It didn't seem like it at the time, but if I'd have just tried, maybe. So don't ever be afraid to reach. Don't ever be afraid to stretch, because you don't want to be my age and say, if I'd have just done that, it might have worked out. And that's what you don't want to be saying to yourself when you get to be my age. I mean, the best part of my life is I've just had so much fun. You know, I got to do all this stuff and see all these things and talk to all these people that I never had any idea. I always wanted to be a reporter, but I never had any idea I'd get to had the opportunity to do that. And just like, you know, sitting down with Willie Nelson, who's hilarious. He's 84 years old, and he still makes 100 shows a year. He's just got a new album out, and the main song on his new album is "Woke Up This Morning Still Not Dead," which is a pretty good goal,
it's
right?
A positive take, yeah.
And the reason he did that, there were all these stories on the internet that kept cropping up that he was dead. Well, he wasn't, you know, and other people would be furious about that. But he wasn't. He just laughed and thought it was funny and wrote a song about it. And it's a really good song, you know. And it's also a really good philosophy, you know. When you wake up in the morning alive, it's going to be a great day.
Oh, definitely.
You know, a lot better than if you wake up dead.
True.
I mean, we don't know what that has.
I saw that you were trying your hand at songwriting.
Oh, yeah, I write
and
songs.
Singing.
Yeah. I'm not a very good singer, but I'm a pretty good songwriter.
Is this what's next for Bob Schieffer?
Well, as a matter of fact, funny you should ask, but a friend of mine, I mean, she's a new friend of mine, but she's works with Willie and is a publicist and stuff, and she was going down to Nashville this week, and she's going to take some songs that I wrote down there and play them for some artists down there and see if we can get a cut.
So we could be seeing you on the Grammys now.
That's my
from
goal.
Emmys to the Grammys.
The highlight of my life so far is in 2008. I had a little band at the time, and we were on the Grand Ole Opry, and that was that was really great. It was during the presidential debates, and the next week I was moderating the debate at Hofstra between President Obama and John McCain. But I was a lot more nervous when I stepped out on the stage of the Grand Ole Opry than I was moderating that debate.
I can't even imagine.
Yeah, but songs are great. I just love to write them. Just, you know, country music. Somebody said, you know, it's 3 chords and the truth, and that's kind of always been my goal.
I grew up on country. That
Did
actually,
ya?
I mean, that really does make sense. That the things, and I was just listening to it in my car on the way here.
Do you ever sing, or do you?
In the shower.
Do you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nowhere else. A lot of times people feel like, you know, their ears are going to bleed if I continue, but I'm good in the shower.
Good.
Let me just tell you that. Got all the talent there. Well, thank you so very much for joining us. It was an honor to be able to talk to you.
Well, thank you, and I want to compliment you. You have obviously done your homework, and that is the first step in doing a successful interview. And people really appreciate that when you sit down to talk to them, and they realize that you've actually gone to some trouble before you do it. And so it was a lot of fun to be with you, Nicole, and I really wish you the best, and I think you're going to be very successful.
Well, thank you very much. It was an honor.
Thank you.
Honor. And thank you for joining us. If you are interested in joining the award ceremony at Woodruff Auditorium, that begins at 3 p.m., and Bob will be answering more questions there. Hopefully not to the silly caliber that I've brought them to here. But I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day and enjoy your visit to KU.
Thank you so much, Nicole.
Thank you.